You've seen it before, that look. The faint curve of her lips that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Not deception, not affection, but something older, like a veil worn so many times. Even she forgets it's there. You remember it now, don't you? That strange flicker in a woman's gaze, when her laughter falls out of rhythm, when her body stays but her soul slips behind the curtain. She said she wanted peace. She said she wanted safety, but her breath caught only when the storm came close. You were the storm once, and you were the safety too. But the part she reached for in the dark wasn't the hand that comforted her. It was the hand that disappeared. There is something behind the smile, not malice, not seduction, a hunger that even she cannot name. It waits like a mirror that reflects no face, only movement. And when you finally look into it, not with your eyes, but with the wound that never closed, you will see the one thing that terrifies her more than danger's stillness. The moment when nothing happens, and her shadow begins to scream. You thought the smile meant you were welcome. You thought softness signaled peace. But that was the first illusion. The smile wasn't hers. It was borrowed. A ritual inherited from mothers who learned to survive by hiding their teeth behind silk. You mistook that ritual for truth, but even she didn't know what it meant anymore. Her lips moved like memory, not meaning. And you, drawn like a moth to gentle warmth, failed to notice the flicker in her gaze. That wasn't affection. That was the shadow looking for a way out. You believed you were supposed to protect her, that she wanted safety, but it wasn't safety that made her pulse race. It was risk, the ancient pull toward fire, not shelter, the ache for something primal enough to shatter masks. You were kind, stable, predictable, and she thanked you for it. But beneath the thanks was a silent scream, buried under generations of good behavior. She didn't want to be held. She wanted to be hunted, not harmed, but witnessed by something wild enough to scare the fear out of her. There are dreams she won't admit to, scenes that play in her sleep, where she's pulled into dark forests, chased by figures without faces, trapped against the unknown. These are not nightmares. These are instructions, the unconscious revealing what the smile dares not speak. You wonder why she drifts when you offer certainty, why she turns her face when you speak with calm reason. It is because you're only speaking to her mask, and her mask is polite, but bored. Her soul, however, is clawing through mirrors, seeking something that doesn't reassure but awakens. You gave her peace, but she longed for war. Not violence, but the sacred disruption that breaks illusion. She craved the moment when the floor would vanish, when your voice would shake, when your own shadow would emerge from its cage, not so she could run, but so she could finally see if anything in this life was real. And you, tragically noble, never let yourself fracture. You stayed composed. You thought that was strength, but to her, it was sterility. The smile became emptier every time you answered questions she never asked. Every time you said, "I understand," but did not bleed. She doesn't want understanding. She wants recognition, not of her manners, but of her monsters. She wants someone who sees the flicker before the smile, the tremble behind the laugh. You never looked there. You feared disrespecting her dignity, but she was never afraid of being disrespected. She was afraid of never being seen beyond the performance. She does not lust for cruelty, but she needs the mirror of danger, the kind of man who might destroy her masks without asking permission. You think this is cruel. You think this is madness. But remember the myths. Remember the maiden who walked into the woods to meet the wolf, not to flee it. The tales were warnings, yes, but they were also maps. The feminine psyche does not seek still waters. It seeks transformation, and transformation is not safe. It devours. The old gods did not protect, they demanded sacrifice. That part of her still waits in silence. You brought her flowers, but she was waiting for the wind to rip the door off its hinges. She smiles when you bring order, but her soul burns for chaos. Not because she is broken, but because she is bound. Civilization tied her in ribbons. The ribbons are lovely, but they suffocate. And when you echo the culture's promises, stability, consistency, harmony, she nods. But something inside her shrinks. She cannot tell you why she cries at night. She doesn't know. But it's not from pain. It's from absence. Something inside her has never been touched by truth. She dreams of fire not to be burned, but to feel. You think of her as delicate, but that's the mask again. Her real self could shatter stone. She does not want to be above you, but neither does she want you beneath her. She wants the confrontation, the tension, the wild recognition between equals who bleed differently. You offered her sanctuary. She was looking for a mirror. You gave her a future. She was searching for the moment when the present cracked open and revealed something primal, a moment too raw to control, too alive to explain. And you wonder why she disappears, why the warmth fades, why she turns from you, slowly, like a ghost losing interest in a dream. It is not because she is ungrateful. It is not because she is cruel. It is because the smile you fell in love with was never hers. It was the last barrier, and you stayed on the outside of it, thinking that was love. But love, for her, is danger survived. It is ritual undone. It is shadow touched without flinching. You think she wants the man who stays, but deeper still, she wants the man who dares to not believe the surface, dares to push past the masks, not violently, but mythically. The man who won't be hypnotized by her beauty or disarmed by her calm. The man who hears the silent scream and answers it not with comfort, but with fire. You did not fail her by being safe. You failed her by not being real. She wasn't waiting for the night. She was waiting for the beast who remembered her name. And so, you ask, what was the smile? It was her contract with the world. A contract made in childhood, a spell cast to survive, to be wanted, but not touched, admired, but not known. You honored the spell. She needed you to break it, but you bowed before her mask and called it love. That's when she knew she was still alone. You believe women flee from danger, but the deeper truth is this: they flee from unreality. They flee from the man who cannot bleed in the open. They flee from the silence that avoids the soul. You were gentle, but you were not present. You were kind, but you were not true. Her smile faded, not because she changed, but because you never saw her in the first place. Only the idea of her, the projection, the part of her that society packaged for safety. But the real woman, the one behind the dream, waits in the wild. Her dress torn by branches, her voice hoarse from silence. She walks the edge of the forest, not because she's lost, but because she remembers. She remembers what the village forgot, that safety without fire is sleep, that predictability without danger is death. She doesn't want to destroy you. She wants you to descend into the underworld of yourself, into the parts you keep locked in light, because only there can you meet her, not in theory, but in blood. You may never see that smile again, because once she knows it's not hers, she can't wear it, and you, if you dare, must now choose. Do you stay the man who gives her everything she says she wants, or do you become the one thing she never dares to ask for, the truth beneath the mask, the danger behind the calm, the mirror that doesn't flatter but frees? She waits, not in the kitchen, not in the bed, in the forest, in the silence, in the fire you were taught to fear. And her smile, it was never hers. It was yours, your final comfort, your last illusion, the one you now must burn. She shattered the mirror not to destroy her reflection, but to see if anything inside would bleed. You always thought the mirror was sacred, that it kept her whole. But it was the mirror that lied. It never showed the fractures. It only reflected what she rehearsed. A perfect face, a composed expression, a smile calibrated for affection. You stood beside her in that reflection, thinking you were real, but you were only light bouncing off glass. She broke it because she needed to feel something raw, not love, not pain, something unnameable, something older than both. You were watching her closely when it happened, not the shattering that came later. You saw the beginning, when her voice started losing rhythm, when her eyes stopped returning to yours, when she spoke like she was somewhere else. You thought it was exhaustion, it was erosion. The persona she had maintained for you for the world had grown brittle, and she couldn't tell you. Not because she didn't want to, but because there was no language for that kind of disappearance. How does one confess that the woman you loved had never been alive in the first place? The tragedy is not that she lied to you. The tragedy is that she had to, not consciously but ritually. She'd been taught since girlhood that approval keeps you safe, so she became what was wanted. She wore sincerity like a costume so well that even she forgot it was stitched together. But desire doesn't bloom in safety, it withers. And the part of her that felt most alive was the part she had buried deepest. Not because it was evil, but because it was dangerous to the persona. She needed you to find it, but you kept lighting candles when she needed lightning. You offered her comfort, and that was the first wound. Because comfort is a closed circle. It defines what will happen and what never will. And she wanted rupture. She wanted the unknown. Not because she's chaotic, but because her soul speaks the language of storms. The feminine does not grow in sunlight alone. It expands in the eclipse, in the places where certainty cannot reach. She needed you to step into the places you feared, but you stayed where it was warm. You were proud of your warmth. She watched it like a cage. The mirror began to crack the moment she stopped seeing herself in your eyes. You were looking, yes, but you weren't seeing. You were projecting a goddess, a good girl, a beautiful partner. All the archetypes that serve the ego's illusion of control, but not the truth. Never the truth. She had demons too, but not the kind you imagined. Not addictions or breakdowns. Subtler, she had needs she couldn't name, hungers she didn't dare touch, fantasies she exiled from speech. And when she caught herself yearning for danger, for the wildness in a man's silence, she felt shame. Not because it was wrong, but because she thought you would never understand. And she was right. You wanted her whole. She needed to fall apart. You offered stability. She needed transformation. You kissed her gently. She was waiting to be devoured, not in flesh, but in being. You made love to her like she was delicate. She was waiting to become animal. You whispered promises. She craved the language of ritual, of thresholds crossed without permission. It wasn't about dominance. It was about presence. The kind that stands at the edge of chaos and doesn't blink. The kind that doesn't retreat when the feminine begins to rage. But you were afraid of her rage, afraid of her sorrow, afraid of the one who would claw at your chest and demand, not answers, but blood. You feared it because you still believed love must be clean, that devotion must be soft, that truth must never shake the walls. She waited, patiently, for you to come undone, not as punishment, but as invitation. She wanted to see the man who doesn't flinch, who can witness her fall apart without trying to fix her, the man who walks with her into the underworld, barefoot, bleeding, and without a name. You thought this was madness. She thought it was the beginning. Every time you reacted with logic, She folded further into silence every time you responded with control. She lost a thread of trust, not because you weren't kind, but because kindness without depth is a mask, and masks, once seen, become unbearable. She tested you not out of cruelty, but desperation. She broke patterns to see if you'd follow. She ignited conflict to see if you'd stay conscious. She opened her shadow in small gestures, in little defiant truths, to see if you would still call her beautiful when the mask slipped. But you didn't see it. You only saw a problem to fix. You never realized that the chaos she brought was a gift, not to torment you, but to call you into yourself. She needed to see your shadow not as weapon, but as presence, the part of you that doesn't tremble in the face of hers. But you stayed clean, you stayed calm, and so she broke the mirror, because she knew you never would. And the blood on her hands was not from malice, it was from resurrection. To become alive, she had to shatter everything that kept her adored but unfree. Now you sit in the ruins of a love that never began. You remember her body, her perfume, the sound of her laugh in the early days, but that was not her. That was the image, the echo, the agreeable apparition. The woman behind that laughter has no name in your memory, because you never truly met her. You met her reflection in the mirror, and now the mirror lies in pieces, and she, the one who could have worshipped you with ferocity, has vanished. Do you feel the silence now? It's not abandonment, it's reckoning. You were given a chance to become something rare, the man who does not hide from the dark. But you performed instead. You became safe. You became known, predictable, admired. And in doing so, you vanished too. You stopped being myth. You became mirror. And no woman breaks a man who is already flame. But you were glass. She needed fire. She needed to touch something that didn't reflect her but scorched her illusions clean. And now, she dances alone, in moonlight, barefoot among shards, not broken, not ashamed, but awakened. She laughs again, not politely, not for you, but from her belly, from the shadow, from the place she almost let die to be loved by you. That laugh is not an invitation. It is an elegy for the version of you who stood still while she burned. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be seen. And now she knows the difference. She walks past mirrors without flinching. She does not care how she appears. She does not fear her shadow. She has become the thing you were too careful to become. Not a goddess, not a monster, something older, something unnamed, something no mirror can hold. You look into your own eyes now and see her ghost, not in regret, but in recognition. You were never her mirror. You were supposed to be her fire, and you stayed cold. You didn't notice the moment you became the shadow, not hers, your own. It was gradual, like fog filling a valley, silent and without form. You still spoke in the same voice, smiled the same way, gave the same reassurances. But behind your eyes, something had collapsed. You no longer believed in the man you were pretending to be, and yet you kept performing him. You thought if you held the shape long enough, she would return. But you misunderstood what she had left. It was not you, it was your absence. The shadow doesn't arrive with fangs. It arrives with routine, with control, with the need to be seen as good, stable, admirable. That was your first possession, the belief that goodness was love. But love has always lived in the cracks of that mask, in the moments when your voice trembled, when your hands forgot how to comfort, when your silence became too large to swallow. She was never afraid of your darkness. She was afraid you had none. You thought light made you lovable. You thought empathy would save you. But empathy without truth is manipulation not of others, but of the self. You gave her safety, and it became her prison. You made her the pedestal, and she became the judge. You called it devotion, but it was avoidance. You avoided conflict, thinking it was noble, but she felt it as neglect. She wanted a man, not a monument, a man who could rage with awareness, a man who could stand in fire without asking for praise. And so your shadow grew teeth, quietly, because every smile you wore without feeling became a betrayal. Every kind word spoken from obligation, not truth, became a fracture. You didn't lie, you performed. And performance is the shadow's disguise. You thought you were gentle, but the parts of you you refused to meet began leaking through in passive glances, repressed desire, buried resentment. She saw it, she always saw it. But when she reached for it, you flinched. You said, "That's not me." But it was. It was the part of you that didn't need permission. You believed being calm would calm her. You thought silence was safety. But silence is also a blade. Every time you stayed quiet to keep the peace, you deepened the war. Not outside, inside. She begged, in her own way, for rupture, not destruction, revelation. And you mistook her longing for chaos. You told yourself she was unstable, but she was just reacting to a world that kept pretending. And you, the man she wanted to trust, refused to fall apart with her. You see it now, don't you? In the aftermath? In the echo of her footsteps leaving? You became what you feared, not monstrous, but hollow, not cruel, but ghostly. A man so busy appearing safe that he became absent. And absence is its own violence. You think she left because she didn't want love. No. She left because love, without soul, becomes suffocation. You never told her what scared you. You never confessed what tempted you. You never admitted the visions you buried under virtue. And so she carried them alone. Every unspoken desire you were too proud to name, she absorbed in her body like a question that never ended. And when she started to twist, when her smile frayed and her warmth went cold, you judged her. But it was your unlived life she was mirroring. The shadow you denied became the shape of her decay. Do you understand now? You didn't lose her. You vanished. You slipped behind performance, behind politeness, behind the image of the man who always knows the right thing to say. And she stood there, alone in your presence, yearning to be seen by someone who didn't need to be admired. She wanted the man beneath the mask, the man you were before you learned to disappear in plain sight. And here is the horror: she would have followed you anywhere, into madness, into grief, into fire, if only you had led her there honestly. But you held her hand with gloves on. You touched her with a heart wrapped in gauze, and she, in the sacred agony of her longing, realized she was making love to a statue. You are not evil, you are empty, and emptiness, when denied, becomes hunger in others. She hungered for truth. You fed her perfection. She asked for depth. You echoed platitudes. You watched her unravel, and you called it drama, but it was initiation. And you stood at the threshold like a priest who forgot the ritual. There is no shame in the shadow, only forgetting. You forgot you were born from storm. You forgot that men too are mythic. You let the world turn you into a product digestible, predictable, clean. She wanted the wolf in you to wake, not to bite her, to meet her, but the wolf was medicated. The wildness was exiled, and in its place stood a man of fine words and dead eyes. You tried so hard not to hurt her, but the wound she could never forgive was the one you refused to share. And when you cried, finally, it was not for her. It was for the part of you she died trying to reach. Now, you wear her absence like a tattoo no one can see. You speak her name only when alone, and even then, it sounds foreign in your mouth. Because the woman you remember no longer exists. She burned with the mirror. She bled through the smile. She left when you still believed she was beside you. And now, all that remains is the version of you that could have met her, the one you buried, to become safe. You don't know how to grieve what was never fully known. But grief comes anyway. Not in waves, in mirrors. You see her face in strangers. You feel her fingertips in songs you once ignored. And every time you remember her laugh, it echoes with the question, where were you when she needed you unmasked? The truth is this, and it will not flatter you. She wanted to surrender. She wanted to kneel in a silence that didn't apologize. She wanted to scream against a chest that did not recoil. She wanted to give herself fully, not to a man who kept his hands clean, but to the one who could hold her while covered in blood, in shadow, in self. You were not that man, not then. But maybe now, in the quiet, you see the outlines of him, the forgotten figure, the dream you exiled for approval. He waits, not to punish, not to rescue, but to be born again, from ash, from ruin, from the echo of the woman who cracked you open without touching you. You became the shadow, and in doing so, you finally became visible, not to her, to yourself. She left her scent on the doorway, not as perfume, but as proof that you were once called beyond the surface. And now, when no one watches, you stare into darkened windows, hoping to glimpse the part of you she tried to awaken. No voice calls your name, no hand reaches back, only silence. A silence that hums, a silence that breathes, a silence that whispers, you were not abandoned, you were summoned. And the only question left is not where is she now, but who are you without her illusion to hold a wolf howls far away? You wonder if it's morning or invitation.